Hello everyone, today we are going over the fascinating stories of how the Vikings discovered North America, their journey to get there, and what happened when they eventually did. If you enjoy our videos and wish to be a part of our journey with us, consider subscribing and liking this video. Also leave a comment telling us where you are listening in from. Let us begin. The sea was not kind that autumn. It roared like a wild beast, thrashing and howling across the hull of the Sjöblad, Leif Erikson's longship, as if the gods themselves were attempting to tear it asunder. Rain fell, in sheets so thick the world vanished behind it. Thunder cracked like the splitting of mountains. The oarsmen, soaked to the bone, strained against the current with hands blistered raw. But Leif stood tall near the prow, cloak flapping wildly behind him, eyes fixed on the churning grey horizon with the grim steadiness of a man who had already defied death more than once. They had set sail from Greenland 2 weeks prior. Leif, son of Eric the Red, had long burned with the fire of discovery, fueled by tales of a land far to the west. The story had come from Bjarni Herjolfsson, who had once glimpsed unfamiliar shores but never made landfall. Leif was determined to reach that land, or die trying. What was meant to be a controlled voyage, hugging the coast of Greenland and curving gently westward, had turned into chaos when the storm struck. The wind changed, the stars vanished behind black clouds, and the waves drove the Sjöblad mercilessly into the open ocean. For days, they were tossed across the deep like a toy. The men grew sick and exhausted. The barrels of fresh water were low. The salted fish, already beginning to rot, was their only food. It was not the storm alone that threatened them, but despair. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm ceased. On the 7th day, the clouds began to break. A pale shaft of sunlight pierced the gloom like a sword. The wind stilled. The sea flattened into gentle ripples. The men, gaunt and salt-crusted, looked up in disbelief as a rainbow bloomed faintly in the east. Leif did not speak. His gaze was unwavering, eyes scanning the horizon. There, to the west, something, a dark smudge. He shouted a word, barely more than a croak, but it carried. Every head turned. As the minutes passed, the shape took form. Not a cloud, not a mirage. Land. Trees. Gods be praised, murmured Halfdan, one of the older warriors, gripping his axe with trembling fingers. We are not lost. We are found. The crew surged with life. Men shouted, laughed, some wept openly. The oars struck water with renewed strength, hearts thundering. Leif stood motionless, awe hollowing out his chest. This was no Greenland. This land was not icy or barren. From afar, it looked warm, welcoming, and green. Forests rolled down to the shore like waves of their own. Deep, rich woods, dark with secrets. The coastline curved gently, dotted with rocky outcrops and narrow inlets. The Norse had found something new. They landed at dusk. The beach was of fine sand and pebbles, the trees crowding close behind it. The scent of pine and wildflowers drifted on the breeze. Birds called from the canopy, strange songs, not the gulls and ravens of home. Leif knelt and pressed his hand into the damp earth. It felt alive. This place, he whispered, this place could feed 100 of our kind. The others spread out in cautious groups. Axes were drawn, bows strung, but there was no sign of humans, only animal tracks in the mud. Hoof prints perhaps of deer, and the heavier prints of something larger, maybe a bear. Torvald, the carpenter, laughed aloud. By Thor's beard, we could build a hall here, a whole new home. That night, they made a rough camp by the shore. Fires were lit, and a perimeter of spears established. They roasted what remained of their fish and began rationing fresh water. Spirits were high. Men told stories. Even Leif allowed a grin to pull at the corners of his lips. He was the first of them to sleep under that alien sky, and he dreamed of trees that spoke in riddles and rivers of gold that sang songs of memory. Morning broke with fog and silence. They ventured inland. It took only a few paces into the forest for them to feel it, the sense of being watched. The woods were thick and tangled. The trunks of trees were wider than any in Greenland or Iceland, and the underbrush was dense with thorns and unfamiliar berries. Mushrooms clustered around roots, vines dangled like serpents. Birds flitted from branch to branch with shrieks and chatter. The men stayed close, moving in a loose column. Halfdan muttered prayers beneath his breath. Leif said nothing. The forest opened suddenly to a wide meadow where a stream cut through with clear water. It was here they saw the first sign that others had been there. Smooth stones arranged in a circle near the stream bank, blackened in the middle. A fire pit, recent. Thorstein knelt beside it. Still warm, he said. We are not alone. Leif studied the woods beyond. No movement, no sound, save for the rustling of wind in the leaves. They may watch us now, he said softly. We make no enemy. We leave no mark, yet. They returned to the shore and began preparations to move inland. It was Leif who insisted they must not sail away immediately. We may never find this land again, he argued. We are not just explorers, we are Norse, and Norsemen build, Norsemen settle. This land, Vinland, I name it, is a gift from the gods. The name caught. Vinland, land of vines, for wild grapes grew on some of the slopes they'd explored, a wonder none had seen before. And so they began. They built shelters first, lean-tos and turf-roofed huts, using timber from the forest. A longhouse came next, a simple one with a central hearth, walls of sod and timber, roofed in thick thatch. The work was hard, but there was no shortage of material. They felled trees, shaped planks, cut stone. Fires were kept burning. Sentries watched the woods. Still, no enemy came. Over the next 2 weeks, they explored farther. They saw rabbits, foxes, massive elk. Once, they saw a shape in the river, larger than a seal, but smooth-skinned. A beast, unknown. Another day, strange birds attacked them from the canopy, drawn by the shimmer of Bjorn's polished helm. They killed 3 and roasted them over the fire. The meat was strange, but not unpleasant. The days grew shorter. Winter was coming, but this land seemed gentler than Greenland. The snow was late, the winds not yet deadly. One evening, as Leif sat carving a rune into the base of a pillar in the longhouse, Thorstein approached quietly. I heard laughter in the woods last night, he said. Leif looked up. Human. Thorstein nodded. Children, I think. But when I stood, it stopped. Leif's eyes darkened. They are watching us. And they know we are not monsters, said Thorstein, or they are deciding if we are. That night, a small gift was found at the edge of camp. A necklace of shells, bound with twine. Delicate. Left on a rock near the stream. No footprints nearby. Leif held it in his palm for a long time. We do not touch them, he said. Not unless they touch us first. But the message was clear. They were not alone. And they were not unwelcome. When winter finally arrived, it came softly. Snow dusted the treetops and coated the longhouse roof like sugar. The sea froze in glittering sheets near the shore. The forest went silent. The settlers stayed close to the fire, telling stories and mending gear. It was in these cold days that bonds deepened. Arguments were fewer. There was food, water, fire, and there was hope. Leif stood outside the longhouse one morning, wrapped in furs, breath rising in the still air. He looked west. We came by accident, he murmured, but we stay by choice. And thus began the saga of Vinland. The snow melted slower in the forest. Though the days had begun to stretch and the sun cast golden light across the sea in the mornings, beneath the thick canopy of pine and birch, the winter still held on. Pale mist drifted between the trunks, curling like ghost breath. The ground was hard and stubborn, giving up the cold only gradually. Yet the signs of spring were there, buds on branches, the chirping of unseen birds, the skittering of small animals. And the Norsemen worked. By now, the camp had a name: Straumfjord, Streamfjord, for the cold, clean river that flowed from the woods and emptied into the sea nearby. The longhouse, which had once been a bare shelter of wood and sod, now stood proudly at the camp's heart. It was modest by Norse standards, perhaps a third the size of those in Greenland, but it was warm, sturdy, and dry. Smoke curled from its central chimney, and inside, life stirred in the early light. Leif Erikson emerged from its doorway, squinting at the morning sky. He had not slept much. Dreams of distant drums and shadowy shapes beyond the trees haunted him still. He walked with his fur cloak pulled tight and his hand always close to the axe at his belt. Yet he did not feel afraid. Not quite. He felt observed. By gods or men I do not know, he murmured to himself, but I feel their eyes. Behind him, the camp stirred. Torvald the carpenter was already sharpening blades beside the woodpile. Thora, one of the 3 women in the expedition, was tending to a pot over the fire pit, and the smell of simmering seal meat and seaweed broth filled the air. 2 of the younger warriors, Håkon and Rurik, were wrestling near the edge of camp, their laughter breaking the early silence. It was becoming, slowly, a kind of life. That day, Leif organized the first true exploration of the interior. They had mapped the nearby coast well enough, found beaches, rocky cliffs, even a small freshwater lake nestled behind the hills. But the deeper forest and the hills beyond remained a mystery. And it was this land they would have to know if they were ever to survive beyond a season. He selected 5 to go with him: Torvald, Halfdan, Thora, Bjorn, their best tracker, and a young shield maiden named Yrsa, whose quiet strength had already earned her respect. They were all armed, well-fed, and alert. Torvald grumbled as he strapped on his pack. Should have brought hounds. The woods stink of spirits. Leif gave him a sideways glance. You think a spirit fears a dog? No, Torvald said with a crooked grin, but I do. They entered the forest by a game trail, narrow and trodden by hooves. Though not hooves they could easily identify. The trees closed in quickly. Light became a rare and shifting thing, and the air grew thick with damp earth and unseen life. Crows cawed above them. Once, a wildcat's scream echoed from deeper within. Bjorn took the lead, moving like a wraith. They found signs quickly: berry bushes half-picked clean, feathers from a bird recently killed, even a fire circle with scorched embers still warm. They passed this way within a day, Bjorn said, crouching low. Whoever they are. No shoes, Thora said, crouching beside him. The prints are bare. Children? Halfdan asked. Leif shook his head. Scouts, or hunters. Could be a tribe, watching us. He turned and looked around. Keep moving. We follow the stream until midday. Then turn back. The forest slowly gave way to gentler ground. At a small rise, they found a clearing. Sunlight poured through a break in the trees. And there, growing wild along a stream bank, were vines, heavy with fat, purplish grapes. Thora stared. In this cold, Torvald reached out and plucked one, popping it into his mouth. His eyes widened. Sweet, he mumbled around it, like summer in my mouth. They gathered as much as they could carry in their packs. We'll plant some near camp, Thora said, If the gods are kind, they'll grow. But it wasn't just the grapes. They found other wonders too. Bark from trees that bled a fragrant amber sap, a grove of hazel trees bursting with nuts, and a small animal trapped by one of Bjorn's snares, a creature like a fat rabbit with long ears and brown fur. They named it Skoghare, forest hare, and roasted it that night over the fire. It tastes like lamb, Torvald said, licking his fingers. If lambs ran like demons and screamed when caught. Spring passed into early summer. The snow melted for good. The sea warmed. Fishing grew easier. The river teemed with fish, larger than any cod they'd seen. With their new abundance, they began to store food. Salted fish, smoked hare, dried berries. The longhouse became full of smells. Thora planted the first garden in a patch of cleared ground. Onions, hardy barley, even a few transplanted herbs from Greenland. It was a slow process. Many failed to grow, but some did. The joy in watching those first shoots sprout from dark soil was greater than any raid. Every week they ventured farther inland. They mapped hills, found stone outcroppings rich in iron, located freshwater springs, and even spotted herds of large deer-like animals they later called horn beasts. They killed 2 and dragged them home, each one as heavy as 3 men, with meat enough to last weeks. They were building not just a camp, but a life, and all the while they knew they were not alone. It was Rurik who found the first drawing. He had been marking trees with carved runes to guide a new hunting trail. On one trunk, deep in the woods, he saw a mark already there, not Norse, not random, carved by stone or bone. A figure, man-like, with raised arms and sunbursts around its head. He showed it to Leif, who stared long at it. A god, perhaps, Bjorn guessed. Or a spirit? No, Leif said, a memory. They mark the woods as we mark stone. It is a sign to others. We are here. So Leif did the same. He carved his own mark on a nearby tree, the wolf of Eric the Red, and beneath it, a simple rune. V. Vinland. Then came the day they heard the voices. It was dusk. A group of scouts, Yrsa, Rurik, Thora, and Halfdan, were returning from the southern ridge. They paused by a creek to drink. That's when they heard it. Murmuring, laughing, low voices in the trees. They froze. No one moved. Then a figure emerged. A child, dark-skinned, barefooted, dressed in pelts. Black hair braided behind her ears. She stared at them wide-eyed from behind a tree. Behind her, 2 more figures shifted in the shadows, older, adult. Yrsa lowered her axe. The child stared. Then she took 1 step forward. Halfdan panicked. He reached for his bow. Don't, Yrsa snapped, but it was too late. The figures vanished. The child darted away like a rabbit. The woods closed behind her like a curtain. By the time they gave chase, nothing remained. Only footprints and silence. Leif was furious. You reached for a bow against a child? He roared at Halfdan in front of the hearth. I panicked, Halfdan said, looking away. It was instinct. Instinct kills peace, Leif growled. Instinct starts wars. He left the longhouse that night and walked to the edge of the woods, alone. There, he laid a gift, a carving of a fish, in wood, bound with leather twine. Then he turned and walked away. 2 days later, it was gone. In its place, a bundle of herbs, fragrant, unfamiliar, and a single black feather. Leif did not speak of it, but he smiled. That evening, he called a feast. They slaughtered one of the horn beasts, roasted it over an open fire. Mead flowed. Laughter echoed into the dark. Even Halfdan sang. Leif stood and raised his horn. To the sea that brought us, to the land that holds us, to peace, if it will have us, the men roared in reply. Late that night, as the embers died, and the camp quieted, Leif walked the shoreline alone. The waves lapped gently. The moon rose full and white. He looked west again, toward the unknown. "This land is no accident," he whispered, and behind him, in the woods, unseen eyes watched, not hostile, curious, waiting. The clearing rang with the rhythm of axes. Wood chips flew like snow in the sunlit air as men labored from dawn to dusk. The Norse had chosen the spot carefully, a gentle slope above Straumfjord's riverbank, with strong rock beneath and tall, straight trees surrounding it. After weeks of foraging, hunting, mapping, and the first cautious contacts with the hidden peoples of the land, Leif Erikson had decided it was time. Time to build something lasting. Not tents, not lean-tos, not mere shelters. A hall, a true one, long and wide, where fires would burn all winter, where tales would be told, and where Vinland would declare its presence to the land, to its gods, and to those who watched from the trees. The trees of Vinland were different from the ones in Greenland or Iceland. Here, the pine and oak reached taller than any they had ever seen. The first time Torvald felled one, it took 5 men to strip and move it. But what a prize it was! Thick, straight trunks with sweet-scented sap that bled golden. Stronger than ashwood, more flexible than spruce. The gods had stocked this land with gifts, Leif thought, and they would honor those gifts with what they built. They began with clearing. Every hand helped. Warrior, farmer, and fisher alike. Even the women took up axes or carried stones. Thora, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, was often seen dragging logs, twice her size. Yrsa supervised the digging of post holes. Bjorn and Thorstein measured and remeasured the plan Leif had drawn in the dirt. A long rectangle facing east-west, with a sloped roof, open hearth in the center, and crossbeams carved with runes for protection. "This hall," Leif declared one morning, "will not be ours alone. It will be for every Norseman who comes after us, and maybe for the ones who already watch us, unseen." He looked toward the woods as he said it, and for a moment, the trees felt closer than before. In the first week, they built the skeleton. Thick beams rose from the earth like ribs, sunk deep into pits lined with stone. They fastened crossbeams with wooden dowels, using techniques passed down from Norway to Iceland to Greenland. There were no nails, only the craftsman's eye and centuries of knowledge. Torvald oversaw the joinery. He worked like a man possessed, muttering to himself in time with his axe. "One day," he told Leif, "we'll build 10 of these, a village, maybe more." Leif smiled. First one must stand. And stand it did. Slowly, steadily. As they worked, the days grew longer. Summer had come in too full. The sun barely dipped below the horizon at night, lingering in golden twilight. Flowers bloomed between the stumps. The river gleamed like a silver serpent. But summer brought more than warmth. It brought watchers. At first, they were glimpses. A shadow slipping behind a tree. A flash of movement by the river. Once, Håkon swore he saw a child dart between the ferns. The gifts continued too. A bundle of dried fish left by the river. A necklace of woven bark hung from a branch. A polished stone, carved with a symbol no Norseman recognized. Leif responded in kind. A bracelet of carved bone. A pouch of dried herbs. A knife with a handle of driftwood. Slowly, an unspoken dialogue formed between the newcomers and the unseen. But no face had yet been seen clearly, until the day the roof beam cracked. They were raising the central ridgepole, a monstrous log that would span the entire length of the hall. Ropes strained. Men shouted. The pole was halfway into place when one of the supporting posts gave a sickening groan. "Pull back," Torvald shouted, but it was too late. The post cracked. The beam fell. Sven, the youngest of the crew, barely rolled out of the way before it smashed into the ground with a thunderous crash. Splinters flew, dust rose. For a moment, there was a silence, then a rustle from the trees. Heads turned. There, not 20 paces away, stood a figure. He was no ghost. He was young, perhaps no older than 20, with dark hair, copper skin, and eyes like river stone. He wore a tunic of deerskin and leggings laced with sinew. His bow was unstrung, slung over one shoulder. In one hand, he held a bundle of herbs. His other hand was raised, open, empty, peaceful. The Norse froze. Then Leif stepped forward slowly, palms open. No weapons. The young man tilted his head. Then, without a word, he stepped forward, knelt beside the shattered beam, and examined it with surprising focus. He tapped the broken wood, pointed to the cracked post, and made a sweeping motion with his hand, a clear gesture. This, he seemed to say, was wrong, too weak. You need better. Torvald blinked. He's giving advice. Leif nodded slowly. Let him. That night, the visitor returned, with two others. They brought gifts, a bundle of straight, strong branches, saplings with dense grain and no knots. They carried them into camp without hesitation and laid them beside the broken post. The Norse did not speak. They watched, and when the strangers turned to go, Leif called after them in slow, careful Old Norse, "Come again, help build." One of them, an older woman with long braids and weathered hands, nodded once. Then they disappeared into the woods. The next day, they returned. They did not speak the same tongue, but they knew the language of builders. Together, Norse and Native worked side by side. The strangers showed how to bend the saplings into curves using heat and water. They taught how to reinforce joints with resin from the trees. In turn, the Norse showed how to lash beams with rope, how to construct a wall of turf and timber, how to carve runes into the threshold for protection. It was awkward at first. Some Norsemen remained wary. Halfdan muttered about witches and spies. But Torvald, impressed, said simply, "They know the land. We'd be fools not to learn." By midsummer, the hall stood tall. It stretched 30 paces from end to end, with thick turf walls, wooden beams carved with dragon heads, and a wide doorway facing the rising sun. Inside, the hearth glowed with the first ceremonial flame. They named it Hjartahall, the Hall of the Heart. The first feast was held that same night. All were welcome, Norse and Native alike. The guests arrived silently from the woods, bearing cooked fish, smoked meat, berries, and painted shells. They entered the hall without fear. Inside, fire crackled, mead flowed, music rang, flutes made of bone, drums stretched with hide. The Norse sang of Asgard and Midgard, of Thor and Odin, of the long journey west. The natives sang songs too, softer but deep, their rhythms tied to the heartbeat of the earth. Leif stood at the hearth and raised his cup. "We did not come to conquer," he said. "We came to live and to share. May this hall stand 100 winters." The response was silence. Then the old woman from the forest raised her own cup and nodded. The hall roared with cheers. That night, while others drank and danced, Leif sat by the fire, watching the flames. Beside him, Thora sat, sharpening a knife. Across the room, Yrsa laughed with one of the visitors as they compared beads. The hall was alive, not just with people, but with meaning. It was more than shelter. It was home. Later, in the quiet hours, Leif stepped outside into the silver twilight. The moon shone on the river. The woods stood still. He walked to the edge of the forest and pressed his hand to one of the trees. "You watched us," he said softly. "You tested us, and now you help us." A bird called somewhere in the branches, and Leif smiled. He turned and walked back to Hjartahol, his hall, their hall, and knew that this was the beginning of something greater than he had imagined. Not conquest, not even survival, but legacy. Autumn came with fire in the trees. The forests of Vinland, once a thick green wall, now blazed with color, crimson, amber, and gold. Leaves fell like drifting embers, blanketing the ground and softening the footfalls of both hunter and prey. The days shortened, the mornings frosted. Deer grew fat in the fields. The river slowed, colder and darker. And in the camp of Straumfjord, the Norse moved quickly. Winter was coming. And though it would be their second in the land, no one knew what to expect. The first winter had been harsh, but they had only barely touched the land then, sheltered in temporary huts with limited supplies. They had survived, but only just. Now, they had Hjartahol. They had stores of fish, barrels of dried grapes, pickled roots, smoked meat, and buckets of hazelnuts. Their garden had produced enough barley for modest loaves. They had axes, bows, a growing herd of semi-tamed goats, and allies in the forest who sometimes brought gifts in trade, herbs, corn, salt, even a kind of soft fur they had never seen before. But still, winter in a new world was not something to take lightly. Leif Erikson sat at the head of the longhouse table, scratching lines into a wooden plank. Inventory. He looked older than he had the year before, not from age, but from weight. The burden of responsibility had grown. Torvald entered, shaking frost from his beard. "Colds earlier this year," he said. "The river's already starting to ice." Leif frowned. "And the fish?" Slowing, not many biting. Leif nodded and made another mark. From the corner, Yrsa spoke. "We can send traps deeper into the woods. The hornbeasts are still moving, and the stranger said the big furred ones, bears, still sleep lightly in the early frost." "There's danger in that," Halfdan grunted. "Wake the wrong one, you end up meat instead of the other way round." Leif looked up. "Then take care not to wake them." He stood, rolling his shoulders. "Today, we check the west stores. Tomorrow, we set traps. No one goes alone. We've built this place with sweat. We'll not lose it to carelessness." The others nodded. The preparations began in earnest. For days, the camp moved like a hive. Wood was chopped and stacked high. Meat was smoked and wrapped in moss. Clay jars were filled with rendered fat and sealed with wax. Furs were stitched into coats. The roof of the hall was reinforced with extra thatch and earth. Snowshoes were repaired and oiled, boots patched, sleds built. Even the children, there were now 3, born in the spring, helped carry kindling and dry branches. The bond between Norse and Native had grown as well. The visitors from the forest now came weekly, sometimes more. They never stayed long, but they shared knowledge. One old man called Tawatkoa taught Thora how to ferment root drink in buried clay pots. A younger woman, Nessa, showed Yrsa how to find edible moss under snow. They spoke in gestures, bits of borrowed words, and growing trust. The Norse offered iron needles, sharp blades, and smoked fish in return. It was not a treaty, nor an alliance. It was something older, respect. Then came the first real snowfall. It arrived overnight. The morning revealed a world transformed, white and still, like the gods had laid a new skin over the land. Children squealed and leapt into drifts. Warriors groaned and began clearing paths. The goats stood confused, stamping and snorting. Inside Hjartahol, the hearth burned high. Outside, winter truly began. It was in the second week of snow that the sickness came. It began with Rurik. He awoke feverish, coughing deep in his chest. His skin was hot, his breath shallow. Thora brewed herb stews, and Yrsa laid cool cloths on his brow. But within days, 2 others showed symptoms. Then 5. A darkness fell across the camp. Inside the hall, coughing echoed like drumbeats of death. The sick lay in the corners on pallets, moaning. Thora and the others burned pine needles for the smoke, believing it would drive off the spirits. Leif ordered no one enter the hall without cleansing in the river, even freezing as it was, but it did not stop the spread. One morning, Rurik did not wake. He was buried beneath a cairn near the edge of the forest, with his shield and axe. Snow covered the stones before nightfall. The next morning, a second body joined him. Leif sat by the hearth, his hands stained with ash and resin. His eyes were red. He had not slept. Torvald crouched beside him, quiet. "This land does not want us," Torvald finally said. Leif looked up slowly. "No," he said, "it does not yet know us." He rose. "We are not leaving." No one had asked, but the words needed to be said. "We've built something here, and like all homes, it must survive the fire before it becomes strong." He looked around the hall. "This sickness will pass. We bury our dead, and we keep going, or we let the cold and grief bury us all." Yrsa stood and said, "Then we keep going." The turning point came on the 10th day. Nessa arrived unannounced, with a bundle of bark and herbs. She entered the hall without fear and knelt by the sick. She pressed poultices to their chests, made a hot drink from her satchel, and stayed the night. By morning, 2 of the worst cases were sitting up. Leif watched silently. Then he bowed his head. "Thank you," he said. She smiled, not with her lips, but with her eyes, and left as silently as she came. The next day, the sickness began to fade. Winter deepened. The river froze fully. The goats were moved indoors. Snow rose to the windows of the longhouse. But inside, life stirred again. The sick recovered. Children laughed. Songs returned. The hall became the center of everything. In the mornings, warriors sharpened weapons and checked traps. In the afternoons, the women wove, sewed, and cooked. In the evenings, stories were told by firelight. Bjorn spoke of Thor's hammer-cracking mountains. Yrsa told tales of sea serpents and the ghosts of drowned sailors. The children listened wide-eyed. The elders smiled. And outside, the snow fell. But not all was peace. One night, a scream shattered the calm. It was coming from the goat shed. Leif and Halfdan burst outside with torches and blades. Snow whipped around them. Inside the shed, they found a nightmare. 2 goats lay dead, throats torn. In the corner, Sven was curled up, bleeding from the leg. He pointed, pale and shaking. "Eyes," he whispered. "Red. Teeth. It wasn't a bear. It watched me." The tracks outside were strange. Huge paws, but too narrow for a bear. The prince circled the shed, then vanished into the woods. The next day, they fortified the entire camp. Spears were posted. Fire pits lit all night. Leif doubled the guard. That night, nothing came. But they did not forget. The creature returned twice more. Once, it was seen only from afar, glowing eyes at the edge of the woods. The second time, it attacked the storehouse, stealing 3 smoked hares and tearing open barrel. Leif and Yrsa tracked it for a full day. They followed the prince into a rocky ravine, where they found a den, empty but reeking of blood and wet fur. They left a trap of sharpened stakes, baited with goat meat. The creature never returned. But some nights, the wind howled in strange ways, and none slept easily. The final trial of winter came not from beast or sickness. It came from within. It began with a fight. Halfdan accused one of the newcomers, a boy named Eric, of hoarding meat. It escalated quickly. Shouts, then fists, then blades drawn. Leif intervened, knocking both to the ground. "Enough," he roared. We are not wolves fighting over scraps. Halfdan spat blood. Maybe we should be. Maybe it's the only way to survive this place. Leif stared at him long. Then he said, "If that is what you believe, leave. Walk into the snow. Be the beast you fear." Halfdan looked away. He stayed, but a shadow lingered in the hall after that. Not all were content, and not all would remain. When the first thaw came, it was subtle. Ice cracked in the river. Birdsong returned, and the trees, bare and silent for so long, began to whisper again in the breeze. The survivors stepped out into the new sun. They buried 4 that winter, but they had survived, stronger, together. Leif stood on the ridge above the camp and looked down at Straumfjord. Smoke rose from Hjartahol. Children played in the mud. Torvald was already planning a new building. Leif smiled. This was no longer an outpost. It was the beginning of a world. Spring awakened the land like a giant stirring from slumber. Snow retreated into shadows. The river, once frozen and silent, roared to life, surging over ice-worn rocks. Trees budded with green fire. Birds, so many birds, filled the sky with songs that the Norse could not name. Foxes darted between the ferns. Elk stirred in the woods. Even the air changed, thick with the scent of wet soil and blossoms. Straumfjord came alive too. After the trials of the long winter, sickness, the beast, hunger, the survivors moved with fresh purpose. Hjartahol's roof was repaired. New furrows were dug for planting. Boats were repaired and launched onto the river. Men laughed more. Women sang again. Children ran through the fields, chasing fat insects and each other. And yet beneath the warmth of spring, a tension lingered. Because despite months of respectful exchange with the native people, a boundary remained unbroken. No words had yet been spoken. Not truly, no fire shared, no names given. Until the day, Leif Erikson stood at the riverbank and heard the voice. It began like any other morning. Leif was walking alone along the stream that fed into the fjord, scouting for signs of otter or fish. He carried his axe at his hip, but not in his hand. He felt at peace. The trees arched overhead in a green cathedral, and sunlight played across the water in dappled coins. He knelt to drink and froze. Across the stream, perhaps 20 paces away, stood a young woman. She had skin the color of bark, long black hair woven with feathers, and a necklace made of tiny bones. Her eyes were dark and unreadable. She was barefoot, standing on a mossy stone, with a spear in one hand. Leif did not move. She did not run. Instead, she tilted her head. Then, in slow, halting words, not Norse, but something close, she said, "You come from Sunside." Leif blinked. She spoke again. "Your house, big fire, smoke, sky." He stood slowly, hands open. "Yes," he said carefully. "We came over water, cold, ice, from far." The woman nodded. "I am Wanasha." She touched her chest as she spoke. Leif pointed to himself. "Leif," a pause. Then her lips curled into a faint smile. "Leif." They stood for a moment in silence. Then she pointed behind her, to the trees, and disappeared. That night, Leif told the others. "She spoke to you?" Thora asked, astonished. "In our tongue?" Torvald asked. "No," Leif said, "but enough." He stared into the fire. "We call them strangers. They call us the same. That must change." He stood. "I will meet them, as equals." Halfdan grunted. "And if they meet you with blades?" Leif looked at him. "Then I will know their answer." The next morning, Leif walked into the forest alone. He took no shield, only his axe, sheathed, and a pouch of smoked fish. He followed the stream until he found the mossy stone again. She was there, Wanasha, and she was not alone. 3 others stood behind her, 2 men and an elder woman, faces painted with clay and charcoal, eyes cautious but not hostile. Leif bowed his head. Then he held out the pouch of fish. Wanasha stepped forward and took it carefully. She opened it, sniffed it, and nodded to the others. One of the men stepped forward and gave Leif a bundle wrapped in deerskin. Inside, corn cakes, still warm, with an earthy smell. Leif smiled. The trade had begun. They sat by the stream for hours, speaking with hands, gestures, simple words. He learned names. Wanasha meant awakens with the dawn. Her father was Inoka, a man of sharp eyes and few words. The older woman was Teyakali, wise in herbs. The fourth was a boy called Seka, quick as a fox. They learned his name and of Yatahol. He learned theirs, Tisquantic, the name of their village, deep in the woods. Their people had lived in this land since before the rivers carved the valleys. They taught him signs for bear, fire, cold, friend. He gave them words for storm, ship, frost, and sea. When Leif returned to the hall that night, he spoke little, but in his eyes burned something new, hope. Over the next weeks, the visits grew frequent, always peaceful, always cautious. Sometimes Wanasha would bring berries or hide. Sometimes Leif would offer iron tools or soapstone beads. Seka became a favorite among the Norse children. He could climb anything, and once ran across the entire hall roof before anyone noticed. Yrsa began to teach the native children how to weave nets. In return, Wanasha showed Thora how to tan hides with tree bark instead of urine. Even Halfdan, ever skeptical, was heard laughing at one of Inoka's hand-gestured hunting stories. The two peoples were building a fragile bridge, and yet no one dared cross fully. Not yet. The breakthrough came with fire. One night, during a feast celebrating the planting of barley, Leif extended an open invitation. He sent a runner, one of the children fluent in both tongues, into the forest with a message: "Come to Yatahol, eat, drink, dance." They came, not all, but enough. Wanasha, Enoka, Teyakali, and others. They sat together in the hall as the fire blazed. For the first time, Norse and Native shared food from the same pot. They passed horn cups. They touched shoulders. They laughed at mistakes and mimed jokes. Then came the music. A Norseman brought out his lyre. A native elder produced a flute carved of bird bone. The melodies clashed, then danced, then found harmony. Children from both peoples clapped in rhythm. And when the drumming began, they danced, stamping feet on the earth floor, shouting to the roof beams, circling the fire in a spiral that blurred skin, hair, age, and tribe. Leif danced too, arms lifted to the smoky ceiling. At one point, Wanasha caught his hand. They spun together, laughing. That night, he walked her to the forest's edge. Neither spoke. Before she vanished into the trees, she touched his chest, gently with her fingers, just over his heart. Then she was gone. In the days that followed, things changed. Children spoke both tongues now. Hunters from Tisquantic showed the Norse how to stalk elk silently in snow. The Norse taught them how to fell trees with metal blades. The first shared hunt was planned, and it ended with a massive hornbeast roasted on a spit beside the fjord. But not all were pleased. Among the Norse, whispers grew. Some feared they were becoming too close. One man, Gunnar, a trader, spoke openly. "We came to settle, not to kneel." Leif replied calmly, "We are not kneeling, we are learning." "They are not our kin," Gunnar insisted. "Then treat them as guests," Leif said, "or leave." Gunnar left the next morning, took a boat north. He was not seen again. From the natives, too, tensions arose. Some elders in Tisquantic viewed the Norse with unease. They brought metal, strange gods, and loud children. They cut trees too quickly, but Enoka stood firm. They do not take without giving, he said, and they have not spilled blood, so peace held. But it was a peace like ice over running water, thin, shifting, and alive. One evening, Wanasha came to Yatahol, carrying a carved bowl. Inside were seeds, round, black, slick. She held them out. For Earth, she said. Your Earth, good. Life took them carefully. What are they? She pointed to the fields. Better food, ground corn, makes strong. They planted them the next morning, together. Spring passed into summer. The barley grew tall. The corn sprouted. The bond between the two peoples became more than cautious cooperation. It became community. Children played together. Women traded patterns and dye. Men hunted in pairs, Norse with Native. And when the first ripe fruits were gathered, they were eaten under the same sun. But even as joy grew, a shadow loomed, far beyond the forest, far beyond the river. Others were coming, not Norse, not friendly, but that would come later. For now, in the golden heart of Vinland, two worlds had met. And for the first time in the known history of men, they did not burn each other. They broke bread. High summer came with thick heat and heavy skies. The rivers gurgled slower. The forest steamed in the midday light. Insects buzzed in dense clouds, and birds screamed from the canopy above. The crops of Vinland, barley, herbs, and the new black corn from Wanasha's people thrived in the warmth. Yatahol smelled of earth, sweat, and roasting meat. Children ran barefoot through fields. The Norse moved with confidence and pride. They no longer felt like intruders. They felt like settlers. But summer in Vinland had its own rhythm, one the Norse were only beginning to understand. And deep in the southern woods, beyond where the maps ended, a new drumbeat had begun. The warning came with the smoke. It was Seka, the quick-footed native boy, who first spotted it. A thin column of black, rising from beyond the blue hills, far to the southeast. At first, Leif and the others thought it a fire set by lightning. But the wind was wrong. The smoke was too dense, too low. Wanasha stood beside Leif, her face tense. Not lightning, she said. Signal. Leif frowned. Signal to whom? Wanasha did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet. To others, not my people. She pointed to the hills, south ones. They do not like strangers. Leif stiffened. He remembered what Thora had once said. Every land has wolves, Leif, even ones that walk on 2 feet. For the next 3 days, patrols were doubled. Yatahol was reinforced. Spears were sharpened. The boats at Straumfjord's dock were hauled onto shore and hidden among the trees. The outer gardens were abandoned. Traps were set along the wooded paths. No one panicked, but no one laughed either. Even the children sensed the change. Their games grew quieter, their footsteps softer. On the 4th day, a runner arrived from Tisquantic, breathless, bleeding from the shoulder. Enoka translated with grim eyes. Raiders, he said, from the south. They burned a village. 1 day's walk from here. Took food. Took people. Silence fell over Yatahol. They are coming north. Leif wasted no time. He called a gathering of all, Norse and Native alike, inside the longhouse. The fire roared. Shadows danced across the carved beams. They do not know who we are, Leif said. They see a camp with fire and food. They see homes. They see prey, Halfdan growled. But we are not prey, Leif said. Not to beasts, not to men. He looked at Wanasha and Enoka. You have warriors? Enoka nodded. Not many, but good ones. Leif turned to his own. Then we fight, not for conquest, but for home. Torvald stood. This hall is ours, built with blood and back. Thora rose beside him. If they burn it, they burn us with it. Even the elders nodded, so they began to prepare, not for survival, for battle. They had 2 days, maybe 3. Seka and Yrsa scouted southward and confirmed the trail. Dozens of prints, large and fast-moving. Signs of burned trees, piles of dung, slaughtered animals left rotting. The southern warriors were not cautious, they were bold, too bold. On the first day, Hjarteholm was emptied. Children were sent north to the fjord mouth, hidden in a cave guarded by 2 elder hunters. Non-fighters helped dig pits and build palisades of sharpened stakes. Tar was smeared across logs and brush for burning. Hidden caches of weapons were buried along the trail. Inoka's warriors arrived that evening, 8 of them, silent and fierce, bodies painted for war. Among them were 2 women, eyes sharp as flint. They carried bows of dark, laminated wood and war clubs carved with jagged stone. The Norse offered them axes and spears. They declined. "We have what we need," one said. Leif nodded with respect. On the second day, the air changed. Birds vanished. The forest grew quiet. By midday, the first scout was spotted, a shadow at the tree line, watching from the ridge. Thora loosed an arrow. It missed. The shadow vanished. That night, drums began in the distance. Low, repetitive, unnatural. Children's nightmares made real. The attack came at dawn. Mist still clung to the ground as the first arrows flew, silent black shafts from the trees. One struck a Norseman in the throat. He fell without a word. The alarm was sounded. Horns echoed across the clearing. Spears bristled. Fires were lit. Then they came. Dozens of them. Dark bodies painted in ash and blood, screaming war cries, wielding clubs, spears, fire. They came fast. But the defenders were ready. The first wave broke on the outer trench. Pitfalls disguised with brush swallowed 3 raiders whole. Others stumbled on sharpened stakes. Arrows rained from Hjarteholm's roof. Yrsa and Thora shot with calm precision. Then came the melee. The warriors from Tisquantic fought like wolves, darting in and out, striking and vanishing. Enoka brought down 2 men with a single sweeping blow of his stone club. Torvald fought at the gate, swinging his axe in brutal arcs, roaring like Thor himself. Leif led from the center, shouting orders, defending the wounded, dragging comrades to safety when they fell. Smoke and blood filled the air. At the peak of the battle, a second force struck the flank. A group had circled through the trees, trying to breach from the north. They set fire to one of the storehouses. Seka, watching from the trees, whistled a sharp signal. Bjorn and a squad of Norse raced to intercept. A brutal clash followed. Screams, steel on bone, fire licking the walls. But the defenders held, and when the tide finally turned, it turned fast. Halfdan, bloodied and limping, cut down the southern war leader in a single blow, his axe splitting skull and helmet. The raiders saw it and broke. They fled into the trees, shrieking. Leif did not give chase. "We defended," he said. "We live. Let the land deal with the rest." The silence that followed was thicker than the mist had ever been. 6 Norsemen lay dead. 3 of Enoka's warriors did too. They were buried in the sacred grove behind Hjarteholm. Stones were placed, runes carved, songs sung in 2 languages. For the first time, Norse and Native mourned together, not as neighbors, but as kin. In the days that followed, the survivors rebuilt. The burned storehouse was replaced. New walls were raised, taller, thicker. Watchposts were carved into trees, and every fire was lit with a deeper purpose. One usher stood beside Leif one night, looking out over the hills. "You see," she said softly, "some men burn, but some build." He looked at her. "And some fight to protect what's been built." She nodded. Then she reached down and took his hand. And in the ashes of fire, new roots began to grow. The summer after the battle, was the most fruitful season Vinland had yet known. The rain came gently and often, soaking the fields and forests without washing them out. The sun was strong but not harsh, and the wind brought with it the scent of berries and the hum of growing things. The barley fields swayed like golden oceans, the native corn rose above a man's height, and the fish ran fat and silver through Straumfjord's twisting veins. But more important than the bounty of the earth was what began to grow in the hearts of the people. For the first time since Leif and his kin had landed upon these wild shores, there was not just survival, there was vision. Hjarteholm had changed. It was no longer merely a hall for feasting or refuge. It had become a center of culture, of exchange, of memory. Where once 24 people slept in a single room, now several new longhouses had sprung up along the slope, each built with both Norse and native techniques, turf walls combined with bark ceiling, timber joined by wooden dowels, but insulated with dried moss and animal hide. Each home had a hearth, each had a family. Children who had once known only the rocky shores of Greenland or the thick woods of Tisquantic now played together in meadows filled with bees. Mixed words passed easily between them. Sky in Old Norse, river in Algonquian, fire in both. The old world had not disappeared, but a new one had begun. Thora planted an orchard near the river, using seeds gifted from Wanasha's people. Sweet apple, bitter cherry, wild plum. She and Yrsa worked side by side with 2 native women, building a fence to keep the deer out and weaving nets to drape over the trees against birds. Thora smiled often now. She sang while she worked, old songs from her mother's homeland, half forgotten, half improvised. When asked why she sang, she said simply, "Because for the first time, I believe we'll be here long enough to hear these trees bear fruit." Life walked the perimeter of the settlement daily. It had tripled in size. Where once was a clearing, now stood homes, gardens, livestock pens, a smokehouse, and even a small bathhouse built from stone and clay. He made it a point to greet every person he passed, native or Norse, with the same respect. He remembered names, watched children grow, and never let his axe hang on his belt without purpose. He slept less now, not from worry, but from energy. He was building something he had never seen in Norway or Iceland or even Greenland. Not just a village, a future. But peace brought with it new challenges. Land, once abundant, now needed to be divided wisely. 2 Norse families disagreed over a plot near the riverbank. One had cleared the trees, but the other had planted first. Leif called a meeting under the open sky. He did not impose, he listened. Then he said, "In Greenland, a man owns what he claims. But here, the land is not silent. It speaks through use. The one who plants and harvests lives with the land. That is our new law." Neither man liked the answer, but both accepted it. Word spread. Hjarteholm would not be ruled by the axe, but by wisdom. With food abundant and the harvest still weeks away, Leif turned his thoughts toward the sea. A new ship was being built, smaller than the ones they had arrived in, but swifter, shaped for both fjord and open coast. Torvald oversaw its construction, assisted by both Norse craftsmen and native carpenters. The keel was oak, the ribs birch, the decking sealed with pitch and clay. A sail was sewn from leather and linen. Leif intended to use it not to leave, but to explore. He wanted to map the coast southward, find other friendly villages, and ensure no threat, like the raiders from the south, would come again without warning. He called the ship Frida, peace. Wanasha sat beside him. He traced coastlines into bark parchment, using charcoal and crushed berry ink. "You always walk forward," she said, "even when the land is still." Leif nodded. The sea is never still. It waits only long enough for men to forget how fast it moves. She studied the map, then tapped her finger on a southern point. Here, there are people. Friendly? Leif asked. She paused. Not yet. He smiled. Then we will bring gifts. The Frida launched under a blue sky with 20 aboard, 10 Norse, 10 Native, chosen by Wanasha and Anoka. They carried food, knives, beads, fire-starting kits, and bows, the first contact crew of the new world. Before leaving, Leif stood before Hjartarhol and spoke. We came here not knowing if the land would break us. It nearly did, but we stayed, and we built, and now we sail, not to flee, but to greet others, to show them we come not as takers, but as makers. The children cheered, the elders watched with pride, and the sails filled with wind. For 8 days they sailed along the coast. They saw red cliffs, swamps filled with herons, groves of trees with bark that peeled like paper, and stone beaches where seals sunned themselves without fear. They met 3 villages. 2 were cautious but polite. The third did not show themselves at all, though firelight was seen deep in the woods, and Leif's crew heard chanting in the night. They left offerings and moved on. They would not push where they were not welcome. It was on the 9th day that the storm struck. It came from the east, sudden and howling, with black clouds rolling like stampeding horses. The Frida was tossed like a reed in a stream. Oars snapped, one mast cracked. 3 crew were thrown into the sea and nearly lost before ropes pulled them back. They rode the storm for hours. By nightfall, they found shelter in a shallow bay. The ship was battered, but whole. As the fire crackled that night, Leif looked up at the stars through the branches. We still live, he whispered, and beside him, Wanasha nodded. When they returned to Hjartarhol, they were welcomed like heroes. Children clung to their legs. Thora embraced Leif with tears. Torvald wept over the ship, like it was his own child. And Leif gave his report. There are others. Some may be kin, some may be foes, but the sea is open, and we now have a ship. We are not isolated. We are part of something greater. That night, there was another feast. It was larger than any before. Mead, corn cakes, roasted elk, fruit pies, fish stew. At the height of the night, Leif stood once more. I have no king, he said, no jarldom, no crown, but I have something greater. He looked at the people. You, and this place, and the road ahead. He raised his cup. To what we've planted, and the crowd thundered. To the future. That autumn, the barley harvest filled 4 storehouses. The corn grew fat and strong. The trees in Thora's orchard bore their first green apples. A child was born to a Norse man and a native woman, and no one questioned it. It was not strange. It was simply part of the land's story now. Hjartarhol stood taller. The banners above it were painted with symbols from both cultures, runic spirals beside clan totems. The winds of Vinland blew through them, carrying voices that had once been separated by ocean and fear. And now, those voices sang the same songs. In the final days of the year, as snow began to fall again in light drifts, Leif sat beneath the great pine by the river. He carved a figure from wood, a boat, small and simple, and placed it in the water. It drifted away slowly, turning in circles. Wanasha joined him. You are never still, she said again. He chuckled. No, but maybe now. I know where I am. She took his hand, and they sat in silence. As behind them, Hjartarhol burned brightly into the night, not with fire or fear, but with light. The third winter came early. By the time the last apples were plucked from the trees near Hjartarhol and the final ears of black corn were husked, the winds had already begun to howl down from the highlands. Frost formed in the shadows of the trees, and the waters of Straumfjord slowed, darkened, and glazed over with thin sheets of ice. Leif Erikson stood atop the ridge, cloak wrapped tight against the bite of cold, gazing across his village. Where once there had been just a single hall in a foreign land, there now lay an entire settlement. Wood smoke curling from 5 longhouses, pens of goats and chickens, fields gone fallow for the season, and beyond them, the dense forest that both protected and threatened. He exhaled, watching his breath drift into the grey sky like the soul of a man content, yet restless. Winter in Vinland was no longer feared, but it was respected. Always. Preparations began even earlier than the last 2 years. Lessons had been learned. Lessons carved in the bones of the dead. Crops were sealed in clay pots lined with birch bark. Fish were smoked in mass and hung from high rafters. Goats were moved indoors before the frost took their hooves. Wooden barrels of dried berries, cornmeal, and fermented roots filled the storage houses. Axes were sharpened, wool cloaks thickened, boots were patched with deer hide. There was no more frantic scrambling, only steady, practiced readiness. This winter, they would not merely survive, they would thrive. Inside Hjartahol, life settled into its winter rhythm. By day, the hall echoed with laughter and voices. Women weaving, men shaping wood, children being taught to read runes by torchlight. Enneke and his kin shared tales of spirits that lived in the snow, while Bjorn answered with sagas of frost giants and the gods of Asgard. At night, the long fire burned and shadows danced. The old stories grew deeper, and new stories began to take shape. Thora had become the settlement's unofficial healer. With the help of Teyakali, the native herbalist, she prepared poultices, teas, and salves from bark, moss, and roots. No longer did she guess at sicknesses, she now understood them. When a child caught a fever, she pressed warm nettle leaves to the chest, whispered songs over the fire, and laid stones beside the bed, heated in the hearth. Within 2 days, the child ran again. Not magic, Thora said, smiling, just time and listening. And all who entered her care listened more closely now. Torvald, ever the builder, spent the cold days crafting a new water wheel on the lower stream, which he believed could turn grain into flour faster than a dozen stones and hands. Some mocked the idea. Let the stream sleep, Halfdan said. Why make it work? But Leif encouraged him. Make the land your ally. He told him, if it flows, let it work for us. By midwinter, the wheel turned smoothly under a sheet of ice, and the first flour it ground made the softest bread Hjartahol had ever tasted. Outside the settlement, the land brooded. The animals retreated deep into the forest. The skies turned iron gray. The sun rose late and sank early, peeking only briefly over the horizon like a tired watchman. The snow fell heavy some days, soft others. Winds tore through the trees, screaming like wolves. The people of Hjartahol grew used to the sounds. They became music. But it was on the 12th night of winter that the true music came, a sound that had not been heard since their homeland. It began faintly, a low hum beneath the wind, then a deep, rhythmic pulse. Drums, but not war drums. These were celebration drums from the south. The scouts returned the next day. They brought strange news. Another village, different from Tisquantic or the raiders, was making a winter festival. Fires burned high. Dancers were seen circling snow-covered fires. Colors flashed between the trees. Wanasha identified them quickly. The people of the Elk, she said. Nomads. They move with the stars and snow. They are old ones. They do not fight. They sing. Leif's eyes lit with interest. Then let us sing too. The journey took 3 days. Leif, Wanasha, Torvald, Thora, and a dozen others, Norse and Native, set out through the snow. They carried gifts, bundles of smoked meat, iron nails, carved beads, and a bow of ashwood strung with elk sinew. The cold bit at their faces, but their spirits were warm. On the third night, they reached the clearing, and what they saw stole the breath from their chests. Fires blazed in a wide circle. Dozens of people, tall, fur-clad, antler-crowned, danced in a slow, dreamlike rhythm. Their movements echoed the wind. Their drums were carved with spirals and stars. Snowflakes melted as they fell into the flame, hissing like whispered prayers. The Norse stood still, and then Wanasha stepped forward and began to sing, a soft, haunting note, part Norse, part Native, entirely hers. A woman from the elk people turned. She listened. Then she joined. Then others. Then Leif stepped forward and placed his gift upon a flat stone at the edge of the fire. He bowed, not low, but deep enough, and the circle opened. They were welcomed, not as invaders, not even as strangers, but as voices in the same song. They stayed for 2 nights. They learned dances shaped by the stars, stories passed down through sky maps and firelight. The elk people shared smoked roots that caused visions, though Leif declined. Others saw beasts with antlers of fire and great ships flying across the clouds. When they departed, the elk chieftain placed a stone in Leif's palm. Carved upon it, 2 trees growing side by side. No words were spoken, none were needed. Back in Hjartahol, the winds turned colder. The new year crept in, and with it came omens. The goats birthed early, twin kids with black coats. A shooting star tore the sky in 2 one night, long and slow, and the old women whispered of fate. And Thora grew quiet. At first, she said it was the cold, then a sickness. Then she stopped speaking altogether. Leif came to her bedside and found her wrapped in furs, her eyes hollow. "Are you in pain?" he asked. She smiled weakly. "No, I'm just full." "Of what?" "Of everything." She passed that night, her hand held by Yrsa and Teakali. The next morning, the snow stopped and did not fall again that winter. They buried Thora beneath the orchard. The first apple tree had turned its branches toward the east, as if in respect. A cairn was built, and upon it a single carved rune, Hjarta, heart. Wanasha placed a bundle of herbs at the base. Yrsa sang the old funeral song of the north, low and fierce, defiant of death. And then they returned to the hall, because the living had work still to do. Late winter brought new trade from distant tribes. Men with dark red paint across their faces arrived with bundles of strange tobacco, obsidian knives, and cloth woven so tightly it resisted water. In exchange, they took iron hooks, whetstones, and a barrel of fermented berry mead. No blood was spilled, no spears raised, only laughter and bargains. In the final week of winter, the river began to stir. Ice cracked. Fish returned in flashes of silver, and across the fjord, birds gathered in the reeds. Spring was coming. But it was different this time. The people of Hjartahol no longer waited for the snow to melt. They planned. They dreamed. Torvald began sketches of a second wheel, this one to lift water into the upper fields. Yrsa began carving a stone circle for the seasons. Wanasha taught the children the songs of her people in both tongues. And Leif, he sat by the river each dawn, watching the water move faster, and he whispered, not to gods, but to the land itself. "We are yours now," he said, "and you are ours." The winter of winds ended with no battle, no starvation, no sickness, save the kind that time itself brings. It ended with firelight and stories, with breath in lungs and dreams in hearts. And as the first buds appeared on the plum trees and the goats led their kids into the field, the village of Hjartahol stood tall, rooted, enduring, alive. Spring returned to Vinland like a second birth. Snow melted into memory. The rivers swelled and sang. Crops planted in the fall burst from the thawing soil, and children who had grown through the winter like saplings in sleep now raced through the fields, taller, louder, bolder. Birds filled the canopy once more, building nests above the orchards Thora had loved. Her name was still spoken in quiet reverence, whispered into the bark of trees and the steam of the hearth fire. But the land, though gentle in its bloom, did not forget, and neither did Leif. He stood most mornings before the cairn beneath the plum tree, one hand resting on the stone rune for Hjarta, heart, and the other on the hilt of his axe. Not in mourning, not in anger, but in memory. Because with spring came not only growth, it brought guests, and not all who entered Hjartahol came with open hands. It began with a whisper. A man, young, windburned, wearing Norse furs, but no clan sigils, arrived at the edge of the village late one evening, walking from the west like a ghost stepped out of a storm. His boots were torn, his hair matted, his eyes hollow with weeks of solitude. Torvald met him with spear in hand, but the man collapsed before he could speak a word. They carried him into the hall, gave him broth, warmth, and time. When he finally spoke, it was in broken Icelandic. "I am Kolbjorn," he said, "of Jarl Thorstein's party." Every head turned. Life stepped forward slowly. "Thorstein Eriksson?" Kolbjorn nodded. "Your brother." The story spilled out like spilled mead from a cracked barrel. Thorstein had indeed set sail from Greenland 2 summers ago, following the map Life had left behind. With 5 ships and near 100 men, they sought the same dream. A new land, a new start. But storms had scattered them. One ship sank. Another turned back. Thorstein's ship, laden with iron and livestock, reached a stretch of southern coast, far below Hjartahol. There they built a small camp, raised their own hall, and began to settle. Until the sickness came, a red fever, brought perhaps by the rain, or by the brackish wells they dug too close to the salt marshes. Within 2 months, half were dead, Thorstein among them. The rest broke into factions. Some fled north, some turned on each other. Kolbjorn was the only one who came looking for life. "To find kin," he said, "to find safety." He wept, and Life took his hand and said, "You found it." Kolbjorn was not alone. Over the next weeks, other survivors arrived. Some Norse, some Icelandic. One woman had come with Thorstein as a weaver. She now walked with a cane and deep scars on her hands. Another, a boy no older than 12, spoke of wolves taking the last of their meat and the screams that followed in the dark. Leif made space for them all. No tent was denied, no hearth closed, but their arrival came with questions and unrest. Halfdan spoke first, as he often did. "These are Thorstein's people," he said, "but they are not ours. They ran. They brought death." Leif answered calmly, "They brought themselves, and that is enough." "They'll take more than they give," Halfdan muttered. Wanasha, sitting nearby, fixed him with a stare. "Or they will learn," she said, "as you once did." That silenced him, for a time, but Kolbjorn brought more than just people. He brought knowledge of ships being built in Greenland, tenfold what had ever sailed before, of whispers that kings in Norway had heard of a new land across the sea and were beginning to stir, of traders gathering not just goods but swords, of rumors that Vinland might not remain isolated for long. "It is not just our home now," Kolbjorn said. "Others seek it." Leif listened, jaw tight. Then he stood before the fire in Hjartahol and spoke. Let them come, he said. Let them see what we've built. He looked around him. They may come with gold or with axes, but they will meet people, not a camp. A people with walls, with law, with unity. And then, for the first time, Leif said what had been growing in his heart for years. We are not just Norsemen anymore. We are Vinfolk. The hall roared in approval. To mark this new beginning, a great ritual was planned, a binding of blood and oaths, not of kingship. Leif had no interest in crowns, but of fellowship. Each family, each clan, each visitor who wished to remain would swear loyalty, not to Leif, but to each other. A pact that Vinland was their shared home, and that its defense, peace, and future were to be forged together. Old traditions were merged with new. The Norse brought goat blood, ashwood spears, and fire. The native elders brought tobacco smoke, river stones, and sacred herbs. Together they walked to the sacred grove beyond the orchard. Together they stood in a circle, men and women alike. And as the blood of a single goat soaked into the earth, they spoke in two tongues, but with one voice. We will stand, they said, not as raiders, not as conquerors, but as keepers of this land, of this peace, of each other. Hands were clasped, foreheads touched. The wind rose gently, as if in blessing. And so the oath of Vinland was born. That night, the feast was thunderous. 2 elk were roasted whole over open flame. Mead flowed like spring melt. Drums, flutes, and lyres sang in harmony. Even Halfdan danced, awkwardly but sincerely, with one of the Tisquantic women who had helped rebuild his roof the previous year. Children wore painted wooden masks depicting both Norse gods and animal spirits. They chased each other through the flickering torchlight, unaware that they were witnessing the birth of something sacred. Leif and Wanasha sat at the high table, watching, not as rulers, but as stewards. She leaned toward him and whispered, "It is not blood that makes a people. It is choosing each other." He nodded slowly, "and protecting what we choose. But just as spring does not last forever, peace too is a season, and seasons turn." 2 days after the oath was sworn, a rider came from the south, one of the scouts Leif had sent to keep watch near the old raider paths. He was pale, his breath steaming, despite the warming air. "They're gathering again," he said. "Not the ones from before. Others. Many." "How many?" Leif asked. The scout hesitated. 50, maybe more, with weapons, canoes. "Coming this way?" "No, not yet. But they're watching." Leif turned to Kolbjorn, who had been standing nearby, sharpening his blade. "Word has spread," Kolbjorn said. "Vinland is no longer secret." Leif looked to the horizon. "We swore an oath," he said quietly. "Now we will see what it's worth." But he did not rush to war. Instead, he sent messengers. 3 parties, 1 Norse, 1 native, 1 mixed, each bearing the same message. "Come, speak, eat, see. If you seek peace, you will find it." 2 returned unharmed. The 3rd never returned at all. Only a bundle of broken arrows left at the tree line, where they had vanished. At Hjartahol, preparations began once more. The oaths had been spoken, the seeds planted. But now, the Vinfolk would see what could grow from blood and what must be defended by it. The long winter was behind them, but the scars it left lingered like frozen shadows beneath the melting snow. Spring, with its promise of renewal, had stirred Hjartahol into life once more. The fields were green with barley and corn. The orchards, planted with care and devotion, were beginning to bloom. The smoke from the kitchens curled into the soft air, mixing with the scent of pine and earth thawing. Yet beneath the vibrant life, tension coiled like a serpent waiting to strike. It was the time of year when the forest was both most alive and most dangerous. The season when the land's hidden threats surfaced as clearly as the buds on the trees. Leif stood atop the ridge, gazing southward toward the distant hills beyond the great forest. His breath rose in white clouds that quickly vanished in the morning sun. The air was crisp, but sharp as a spear's edge. In the east, beyond the blue hills, the first signs of smoke curled like fingers into the sky. Fires. Fires that did not belong to the people of Yatahol. The message had come through the scouts days ago, carried on wind and whispers. Raiders had been seen moving through the southern forest, burning villages, trampling crops, and taking captives. They were not the native tribes with whom Yatahol had made peace and kinship. These were different, fierce, fast, and unforgiving. The southern raiders came from lands unknown, bearing painted faces and cruel weapons. They were a threat, unlike any Yatahol had faced before. Inside the longhouse, the mood was heavy but resolute. Life gathered the warriors and elders, the fires casting flickering light on faces weathered by years of struggle and hope. The wooden beams above were carved with ancient runes, symbols of protection and strength. Wanasha stood by Leif's side, her eyes steady and clear. She spoke in a calm voice, tempered by the wisdom of her people. These raiders do not understand the land. They move like storms, quick and destructive, but the forest is our ally. It can hide us, it can guide us, and it can protect us. Torvald, scarred from previous battles and always eager for a fight, grunted. Their fire will not burn our homes, their spears will not break our walls. Enoka nodded solemnly. The scouts have seen their numbers, 60 strong at least. They are cruel and swift, but not without fear. We know this land. We will use that knowledge. Halfdan, grim-faced and silent for once, tapped the haft of his axe on the floor. We will send them back broken. The village prepared as if for a great festival, though this one would be forged in steel and blood rather than song and dance. From dawn to dusk, hands moved in purposeful haste. Children watched with wide eyes as warriors sharpened blades until they gleamed like moonlight on water. Women and elders reinforced walls, weaving thick mats of woven brush and stone into the palisades. Smokehouses were emptied of their stores, preserving enough meat and fish to feed the village for many moons if needed. Torvald supervised the construction of hidden pitfalls around the fields, deep holes camouflaged with branches and leaves tipped with sharpened stakes made from iron and bone. Irsa and Thora's apprentice, Teyakali, taught archery lessons in the woods, training young men and women alike to shoot silently from the shadows. Leif oversaw every detail, walking among the preparations with the weight of leadership balanced on his broad shoulders. At night, the village gathered in Yatahol's great hall. Leif called the meeting under the watchful eyes of the carved gods above. The raiders seek to break us, to take what is ours, he said, voice ringing with conviction. But we will stand. We will fight not as scattered men, but as one people. Vinfolk, this is our home. Our blood is in this soil. We will defend it with fire and steel. He raised his axe. The hall thundered in response. The first signs of the enemy came before dawn, just as the mist still clung thick to the fields and the stars faded into pale gray. Scouts reported shadows moving at the forest's edge, 60 figures, clad in furs and paint, faces wild with war cries and savage hunger. They carried long spears, clubs tipped with stone, and bows strung taut. Their war paint was black and red, colors meant to strike fear into the hearts of those who saw them. But the Vinfolk were ready. Leif's horn sounded, a deep, echoing call that broke the silence and rallied the defenders. From the hidden trenches and behind palisades, warriors poured forth. The clash was immediate and brutal. The raiders surged forward like a tide, but fell into pits and traps carefully laid by Torvald and Halfdan. Arrows darkened the sky like falling leaves, finding flesh and bone. Yrsa's voice rose in a fierce war chant as she loosed arrow after arrow, each one striking true. Leif fought at the center of the fray, axe singing through the air and crashing into shields and skulls. The battle was a whirlwind of sound and fury. Steel clashed against stone. War cries mixed with screams of pain. The scent of smoke and blood thickened the air. Leif saw friends fall. Halfdan caught a spear in the side but fought on, bleeding but unyielding. Inoka brought down 2 raiders with a single crushing blow of his war club. Wanasha, moving like a shadow herself, led a flank attack that caught the raiders by surprise, cutting off their retreat. Hours passed like minutes in the chaos of battle. The ground became churned to mud and blood. Smoke rose from the burning brush set by the raiders to create confusion, but the defenders remained steadfast. Slowly, the tide turned. The raiders, battered and disorganized, began to falter. The final blow came when Halfdan felled the raider chief with a crushing swing of his axe, splitting through helmet and bone. At that, the remaining raiders broke ranks and fled into the forest, leaving behind their dead and wounded. But victory came at a price. 12 of Yatahol's defenders lay dead or dying. The village mourned as they had never mourned before. Grief hung heavy in the air, mixing with the ever-present smoke of burning timber and meat. Leif walked among the bodies, the faces of fallen friends seared into his memory. He knelt beside Halfdan, who, despite his wound, still gripped his axe. "Your strength will be remembered," Leif said softly. Halfdan smiled faintly. "As will yours." The funerals were simple but heartfelt. The dead were wrapped in furs and carried to the sacred grove behind Yatahol. Runes were carved on stones to mark their resting places. Songs were sung in 2 tongues. Old Norse dirges mingled with native chants. Tears fell freely, but amid the sorrow was a fierce resolve. Leif addressed the village the next day. "We have paid dearly," he said, "but this land is ours to protect. The fires in the south will not consume Yatahol. We will rebuild, we will strengthen, we will endure." Wanasha stood beside him, her voice rising. "Our strength is in our unity, Norse and Native, bound not by blood alone, but by choice." The village cheered. The oath of Vinland was tested, and it had held. In the weeks that followed, Yatahol grew stronger still. Walls were rebuilt, thicker, traps were improved, new alliances were forged with neighboring tribes who respected the Vinfolk's courage and resolve. Trade resumed, iron for furs, herbs for tools. Children played again, their laughter ringing through the fields and forests. Yet Leif knew the peace was fragile. The fires in the south had been a warning. Others would come, and the Vinfolk must be ready. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Leif stood at the river's edge with Wanasha. The sky blazed with fiery colors, reflecting in the calm water. He turned to her. "This land has tested us." She smiled, "But it has not broken us." He took her hand. "We will face whatever comes next, together." And the river flowed on, carrying their hopes like leaves on its endless journey. Spring had barely surrendered to summer when signs of change whispered through the trees and across the waves of Vinland. The days grew warmer and longer, and the once gentle breeze now carried unfamiliar scents, smoke, salt, and something sharper, like steel scraping stone. Yatahol had healed from the fires in the south. The wounds of battle were fresh in memory but softened by new growth. the walls rebuilt higher, the scars of loss honored with stone markers, the fields thick with barley and corn that promised an abundant harvest. Leif Erikson, however, felt a storm gathering, not just in the sky, but in the hearts of men. It began with a messenger arriving from the east, riding hard through the woods, his horse covered in sweat and eyes wild with urgency. Leif met him at the village gate. "Speak quickly," he commanded. The rider gasped out the words, "Ships, many ships, large ships, from the south, not Norse, painted in strange colors, with sails like beasts' skins. They come for trade or war. We do not know." A hush fell over Hjartahol. Wanasha stepped forward, dark eyes narrowing. "The people of the sea, the ones we have not seen before," Torvald grunted. "Stories from distant shores speak of warriors from the south, sailing great canoes, raiding and trading." Leif's gaze turned distant. "We have made Vinland a home, but the world beyond is changing. We will face new tides." The village prepared as though for winter's return. Leif summoned the elders, the warriors, the hunters, and the women who wove the fabric of their lives. "Vinland is no longer hidden," he said. "Our enemies and friends alike will find us. We must stand united, strong, and ready." The oath of Vinland, sworn years before, was renewed in the great hall by firelight and the watchful eyes of carved gods. New weapons were forged, alliances strengthened with neighboring tribes, and scouts sent to keep watch on the rivers and coasts. Leif met with Wanasha often, their talks deep and thoughtful. "What do they want?" she asked. "Trade, power, land," he replied. "And if they bring war, then we will meet it." Wanasha smiled faintly. "We have learned to live with the forest and the sea. Let them learn as well." One clear morning, the lookout shouted from the tower, "Ships, ships on the horizon." Leif and the village gathered by the shore. The vessels were unlike any they had seen, sleek, with towering masts, sails striped in bright colors, and hulls carved with symbols unfamiliar. The newcomers landed not with war cries, but with careful steps. They came bearing gifts, glass beads, fine cloth, shining metal, and words spoken in a language strange yet musical. The first meeting was cautious. Leif welcomed the strangers, wary but curious. The newcomers spoke of lands far to the south, of kings and merchants, of great cities and wars. They were traders and envoys, seeking to understand this new world and its people. As days passed, a fragile peace grew. Trade blossomed, knowledge exchanged, and even stories told by firelight. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. Not all in Hjartahol trusted the strangers. Old wounds reminded many that gifts could hide daggers. Leif knew the balance was delicate. He worked tirelessly to hold it. One night, a messenger arrived with dire news. A rival fleet, larger and more aggressive, was sailing north, drawn by rumors of wealth in Vinland. Leif gathered his warriors. "We must prepare, not just to defend our homes, but to protect all we have built." The days that followed were filled with toil. Walls were strengthened with earth and stone. Spears and arrows were crafted in greater numbers. The river was scouted for possible ambush points. The village children learned to recognize the horn's call, the signal to gather, to fight, to survive. When the rival fleet appeared, the battle was fierce. The Vinfolk fought not just with weapons, but with the knowledge of their land. They used the forests to hide, the rivers to maneuver, and the winter's traps to turn the tide. Though outnumbered, they held fast. The invaders retreated, leaving the shores scarred but unbroken. In the aftermath, Leif looked upon Hjartahol with both pride and sorrow. The gathering storm had passed, for now, but the horizon was vast and the future uncertain. Vinland was no longer a secret refuge. It was a beacon, and with light came both hope and danger. Summer had long since reached its fiery peak in Vinland. The sun lingered late in the sky, casting long golden rays across the village of Yatahol. The fields surrounding the settlement were thick with ripened grain, bending heavy beneath the weight of promise. Fruit hung from the orchard trees in swollen clusters, their sweet scents mingling with the fresh pine and the smoke of hearth fires. Bees hummed lazily among the wildflowers at the forest's edge, and the river ran clear and strong, its current carrying whispers of distant seas. Yet beneath the beauty of this new world, a storm was stirring, not one born of weather, but of the restless hearts of men, of old grudges, new ambitions, and the fragile balance between trust and suspicion. Leif Erikson sat on a rough-hewn bench outside the longhouse, his broad frame silhouetted against the rising sun. His hands rested on his knees, calloused and strong, but the weight in his chest was heavier than the axe at his side. Beside him came Wanasha, her steps quiet but purposeful. She carried a woven basket brimming with herbs and fresh berries gathered from the edge of the forest. Her dark eyes reflected the rising light, full of both resolve and quiet sadness. "Vinland changes," Wanasha said softly, breaking the silence. "Not just the land itself, but the people who dwell here." Leif nodded, his gaze sweeping across the waking village. Smoke spiraled from chimneys. Children chased one another between the stalls, and fishermen readied their boats for the day's catch. "We built a home here from ash and stone," he said, "but not all who come wish that home to flourish." Those words were proven true the day a group of travelers arrived from the south, neither Norse nor native, but something between and beyond. They called themselves traders and explorers, led by a man named Eric the Bold, a tall, imposing figure with a sharp tongue and eyes that gleamed with ambition. Eric's speech was tinged with southern accents, and his customs were unfamiliar to both the Norse and the native peoples. He claimed distant kinship with the Norse, but spoke of lands far beyond Vinland, of great kingdoms ruled by powerful kings, vast cities of stone and gold, and seas teeming with ships unlike any the Vinfolk had seen. Their arrival stirred the village like a sudden gust. Torvald, the ever-vigilant warrior, scowled openly. "They wear the mask of friendship, but we must not be fooled. They seek to claim what is ours." Wanasha, ever the voice of reason, urged a more measured approach. "Their knowledge and gifts may be tools to build, not weapons to destroy." The village was divided between suspicion and hope. Some saw in the newcomers a chance to expand their world, to trade and learn. Others feared they brought ruin, strangers who would disrespect the land and its peoples. Leif found himself walking a narrow path, balancing the needs of his people with the dangers that new alliances could bring. Trade began, cautious but earnest. Glass beads glimmered alongside iron tools. Spices and finely woven cloth were bartered for pelts, dried meats, and sturdy weapons. Stories were exchanged beneath firelight, tales of gods, warriors, and spirits carried across oceans and forests. But beneath the surface of these exchanges, old tensions simmered. The newcomers claimed hunting grounds within the vast forest, lands sacred to native clans who had long called Vinland home. Arguments broke out in the council, voices rising and falling like the tide. A great council was called beneath the sacred grove, the place where the Vinfolk had once sworn their first oaths. Leif sat among leaders of all peoples, Norse, native, and newcomers alike. He spoke solemnly, his voice carrying the weight of his years and wisdom. "We are bound to this land, but it binds us as well. To protect it, we must protect each other." But not all were ready to hear his words. Makwa, a fierce warrior of one native clan, stood and spoke with fire in his voice. They bring fire that burns our roots, Makwa declared. We must not let their greed destroy all we have built. The grove, sacred and silent just moments before, was now filled with tension. The council ended without resolution. Fires of friendship burned low, flickering in the uncertain wind. Fires of foe sparked brightly, threatening to consume all. In the days that followed, the village felt the strain. Hunting parties clashed in the forest's edge. Weapons raised and tempers flared. Trade caravans were ambushed under the cloak of night. Rumors spread of betrayals, arrows shot from hidden places, supplies stolen or poisoned. Leif and Wanasha worked ceaselessly to restore peace, but the weight of distrust hung thick in the air like morning fog. Amidst this turmoil, a mysterious illness crept into Yatahol. It began quietly, a few shivers and coughs, a pale face here and there, but soon the sickness swept through the village like a shadow. Fevered bodies lay tangled in furs, breath labored and strength drained. Thora's apprentice, Teyakali, took charge of the sick, tending with a fierce determination born from love and desperation. But the disease was unlike any the healers had seen. Fear gripped the village as more fell ill. Whispers spread that the sickness was a curse, sent by angry spirits angered by broken oaths or the arrival of outsiders. Leif and Wanasha refused to believe in curses alone. Together, they ventured deep into the forest, seeking aid from distant tribes known for their mastery of herbs and healing. Their journey was fraught with danger. Wild beasts prowled the woods. Treacherous terrain threatened to claim them, and some tribes greeted them with suspicion. Yet their persistence was rewarded. The healers shared remedies and rituals, teas brewed from rare roots, poultices from crushed leaves, and chants to call the spirits for aid. Returning to Yatahol, Leif and Wanasha brought hope along with the knowledge. The village rallied. Those who recovered aided the sick. Those who were strong rebuilt what had been damaged by fear and illness. Slowly, the fires of hope rekindled. Leif understood that strength alone would not protect Vinland's future. Only unity across cultures, bloodlines, and beliefs could hold them together. He proposed a new oath, not merely one of defense, but of coexistence. Norse, native, and newcomers alike would swear to protect the land and each other, to honor differences and build a shared future. The proposal sparked fierce debate. Some embraced it with open arms, eager for peace and prosperity. Others resisted, clinging to old fears and grievances. Yet Leif's steady voice and Wanasha's gentle wisdom gradually swayed the council. A great ceremony was planned, one that would mark a new chapter in Vinland's history. On the day of the oath, Yatahol transformed. Longhouses and lodges were decorated with woven banners and carved totems, symbols of the three peoples joined in a fragile harmony. Fires blazed higher than ever, their smoke twisting skyward like prayers. The village gathered beneath the sacred grove where centuries of oaths had been spoken. Leif spoke first, his voice ringing clear. This land has tested us, shaped us, and now it calls us to a higher purpose. Wanasha followed, her words weaving a vision of peace, respect, and shared destiny. Together, they led the Vinfolk in swearing the oath of unity, a promise to stand as one people, guarding Vinland's future against all threats. As the last echoes of the oath faded among the trees, a sudden roar shattered the sacred silence. Smoke billowed from the southern edge of the forest. Flames licked the sky. Raiders had returned. The fires of foe threatened to consume all. But the fires of friendship and unity burned brighter still, ready to defend all that had been built. The first light of dawn came like a bloodstain across the sky, a cruel herald of the fire and fury that awaited Hjartehold that day. The horizon, once serene and promising, was now marred by plumes of thick black smoke rising from the southern forests. The scent of charred pine and earth burned filled the air, heavy and oppressive. Leif Erikson stood on the highest rampart of the village's wooden palisade, his broad frame silhouetted against the fiery sky. His eyes scanned the distant tree line where the invading force was gathering. The faces of his people, warriors, women, children, were etched into his memory, and the oath of unity they had sworn just days before burned in his heart. But he knew that no oath alone could halt the storm coming to their door. The raiders were more numerous and more organized than any enemy Hjartehold had faced before. They moved like a dark tide, dozens strong, clad in mismatched armor of leather and iron, their weapons glinting cold and cruel under the rising sun. Painted faces snarled with hatred, their war cries cutting through the forest like thunder. This was no mere band of brigands. This was a force sent with intent to destroy and conquer. Leif blew his horn, a deep, commanding call that echoed through the woods and fields. It was the signal for all able-bodied men and women to take up arms and defend their home. From the shadowed tree line, warriors poured forth, Norse and Native fighting side by side. The village gates slammed shut, and the defenders took their positions. The battle began with a thunderous roar. The raiders charged the palisade, axes raised high and voices filled with savage fury. They crashed against the wooden walls, battering with fists, swords and firebrands, seeking to break through the defense. Leif met them at the front, his axe swinging in powerful arcs that shattered shields and split helmets. The clash of steel and the screams of battle filled the air as friend and foe collided in brutal combat. On the eastern flank, Wanasha led a band of native warriors, their movements swift and silent through the forest shadows. Her spear was an extension of her will, striking with deadly precision. She called to her warriors with fierce cries, rallying them to cut off the raiders' flanks and rear. Her dark hair whipped behind her as she fought, a living force of nature among the chaos. Torvald and Halfdan guarded the western gate, their bodies a solid wall of muscle and iron. Torvald's great hammer crushed bones and shields alike, while Halfdan's axe sang a grim song of death. Blood soaked their clothes, but neither faltered. Yrsa's arrows rained down like lightning, each one finding its mark. Her keen eyes tracked the enemy's movements with unerring accuracy. The forest itself seemed to join the battle. Branches lashed at raiders' faces, roots tripped their feet, and hidden pits claimed the unwary. The defenders used every advantage the land offered, striking with knowledge born of years living in harmony with the wild. Hours passed in a blur of blood and sweat. The sun climbed higher, beating down on warriors exhausted but unyielding. The raiders' momentum faltered under the relentless defense. Their lines thinned as warriors fell, cries of pain and rage mingling in the thickening smoke. Leif saw the raider chief, a hulking brute with a jagged scar across his cheek, rallying his men for a desperate final charge. Leif met him in the center of the battlefield. Axes clashed, sparks flying from the brutal contact. The chief's strength was fierce, but Leif's skill and determination proved greater. With a mighty swing, Leif's axe cleaved through the chief's shield and into his side. The raider fell, his roar of fury turning to a gurgle of defeat. With their leader dead, the raiders broke and fled into the forest. But the cost to Hjartehold was devastating. The village was scarred, walls were splintered and burned, homes reduced to ashes, fields trampled and ruined. More grievous still, were the lives lost. 22 of Yatahol's defenders lay dead, many more wounded, some beyond hope. Leif walked among the fallen, his heart heavy with grief. He knelt beside Wanasha, who tended to a dying child, her tears silent but deep. "We survived," he said softly, "but at what cost?" Wanasha looked up, her eyes fierce with pain and resolve. "We endure," she replied, "because this land is ours, because we fight for our future." The village mourned together. Funerals were held beneath the sacred grove, where the ancestors' spirits whispered among the trees. Songs of remembrance and hope echoed through the night. Leif stood before the village the next morning. "Today, we remember the fallen," he said. "Tomorrow, we rebuild. This land is not just soil and stone. It is life. It is spirit. It is our home. And as long as we stand together, it will remain so." The storm had broken, but its shadow would linger long. Vinland was no longer a secret refuge. It was a battleground, and the fires of war would flare again. Yet from the ashes of destruction rose something stronger. Unity forged in fire, a people bound not just by blood or tradition, but by shared sacrifice and hope. The morning after the great battle, a cold mist hovered low over Hjartahol. The village lay silent beneath the heavy shroud, the air thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth. Charred timber and broken tools littered the paths, while crushed crops in the fields whispered of hard toil lost. The scars of war were etched deeply into the land, but even deeper in the hearts of its people. Leif Erikson rose early, his eyes heavy but resolute. He stood on the embankment overlooking the village, the first pale light of dawn filtering through the branches of towering pines. He traced with his gaze the battered palisades, still smoking in places where raiders' fire had taken hold. The longhouse, the heart of Hjartahol, stood scarred but unbowed. Beside him stood Wanasha, her hands wrapped in cloth, stained with herbs. Her dark eyes scanned the village, fierce and gentle all at once. "This land, it feels wounded," she said quietly, voice carrying a note of sorrow. "But it breathes. It will heal." Leif nodded. "So will we." As the village slowly woke, the sounds of rebuilding began. Axes rang out as wood was cut to replace shattered beams. Voices rose in determined song as neighbors helped neighbors clear debris. Women and men worked side by side, lifting fallen stones and weaving fresh walls from saplings and woven brush. Children, too, carried water from the river, their small hands steady despite the sorrow in their eyes. Elders gathered in the great hall, wrapped in thick cloaks against the morning chill. They spoke in low voices, recounting stories of past hardships and survival. Tales passed from one generation to the next like treasured heirlooms. These were reminders that no winter, no enemy, no fire could truly break the spirit of the Vinfolk. Leif and Wanasha moved through the village, offering words of comfort and strength. At the shattered home of Thora's family, they found the grieving widow cradling her youngest child. Tayakali, Thora's apprentice, helped tend wounds and offer herbal remedies, working tirelessly alongside the village healers. "We will rebuild your home," Leif promised softly, placing a steady hand on Thora's shoulder. "Stronger and safer." Wanasha smiled gently. "And your hearth will burn bright again, warmed by friends and family." Rebuilding was not just an act of labor, but a ceremony of hope. The sacred grove, once shadowed by the battle's fury, became a place of renewal. Villagers gathered beneath its ancient boughs to perform rites handed down by ancestors, burning bundles of sage and sweetgrass to cleanse the land, chanting prayers to the spirits who watched over the forest and river. Leif led the ceremony, his voice steady and clear as he called upon the gods and nature's guardians. One Usher's voice joined his, weaving words in the native tongue that spoke of healing and protection. Smoke rose in spirals toward the blue sky, carrying with it the prayers of a people determined to rise from the ashes. Trade resumed cautiously. The traders who had arrived months before returned, bearing gifts and goods from faraway lands. Glass beads that shimmered like captured stars, spices that tingled the tongue, fine cloths dyed in rich hues. All were welcomed but met with wary eyes. Leif met with Eric the Bold and his companions in the longhouse, the flickering firelight casting shadows that danced on the walls. Talks of peace and alliance continued, tempered by the recent bloodshed and suspicion. "We seek only friendship," Eric said, his voice smooth but guarded. "Together, we can build a greater Vinland." Leif studied him closely. Actions speak louder than words. A slow nod was Eric's only reply. Yet not all were ready to embrace peace. Among the native clans surrounding Hjarteholm, voices rose against the newcomer's presence. Makwa, the fierce warrior who had opposed the council, continued to rally those who feared the loss of their lands and traditions. "Trust is a fragile thing," Makwa said in council meetings beneath the towering cedars. "Once broken, it is difficult to mend." In Hjarteholm, some Norse warriors grumbled over the compromises made, questioning whether peace would bring strength or invite ruin. Leif found himself walking a narrow path, balancing the needs of unity with the realities of fear and anger. To address these tensions, Leif called a gathering of the village and neighboring tribes. Under the spreading canopy of the sacred grove, he spoke with passion. "We have all suffered," he said, "but our survival depends on standing together. The land will provide for those who respect it, and for those who respect each other." Wanasha took his hand, her gaze steady. "We are stronger united," she added. "The fires that threaten to divide us can also forge bonds." The crowd listened in silence, the weight of his words settling like a stone in their hearts. In the weeks that followed, Hjarteholm grew stronger. Fields that had been trampled were replanted with care, yielding new shoots that promised harvests to come. Hunters and fishers ventured deeper into the forest, and rivers, returning with plentiful bounty. The village's palisades were rebuilt higher, strengthened with stone and earth. Traps and alarms were improved to warn against future raids. The oath of unity became more than words. It was lived daily in shared labor, protection, and respect. Even in moments of toil and rebuilding, life continued its rhythms. Children laughed and played, their games echoing the battles they could only imagine. Women wove baskets and spun wool, crafting garments warm and sturdy. Elders taught the young songs and stories that wove the fabric of their shared history. Feasts were held beneath the stars, fires crackling as tales were told, toasts made to fallen friends and hopeful futures. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the river in molten gold, Leif stood on the banks with Wanasha. The water flowed calm and clear, carrying with it leaves and memories downstream. He gazed at the distant hills, silhouetted against the twilight. "We have come far," he said quietly. Wanasha's hand found his, her grip firm and warm. "And yet the river flows on," she replied. "So must we, ever onward." The fires of war had burned, but from their ashes rose a stronger people. Vinland's heart beat steady and true. Together, Norse, native, and newcomers shaped a future, both uncertain and full of hope. A future where stories of conflict might one day give way to tales of kinship and peace. The years had woven themselves into a tapestry of time, each season folding into the next, shaping the land and the people who called Vinland home. Where once stood a handful of Norse ships, timidly braving unknown waters, now lay a thriving settlement, Hjartahol, a beacon of endurance and unity on the wild edge of the world. Leif Erikson, his hair touched by silver and his face etched with the passage of countless seasons, stood atop the cliffs overlooking the endless blue horizon. The sea sparkled beneath the sun's gentle gaze, and the wind whispered through the pines with familiar voices. Ships bobbed gently in the harbor below, smaller than those of the old country, but sturdy, their sails patched and marked with symbols born of a new world. The village itself was a melding of cultures. Longhouses stood side by side with native lodges, their wood and thatch harmonizing with the forest's edge. Children laughed and chased each other through fields of grain that stretched wide and golden under the summer sun. Orchards, heavy with apples, cherries, and plums, swayed gently in the breeze. The fires of the past, the battles and hardships, had left scars, but beneath those wounds, life pulsed with fierce determination. Life turned away from the sea, his gaze drifting to the heart of Hjartahol, where people moved with purpose and care. The markets buzzed with barter and trade, the clinking of iron tools mingling with the scents of smoked fish and fresh herbs. Women wove cloth dyed in vibrant hues, their fingers skilled and steady. Hunters prepared their weapons for the next journey into the forest, their eyes keen and respectful of the land that sustained them. Beside Leif stood Wanasha, her presence steady and serene as always. She was the living bridge between two worlds, a symbol of the unity that had become the village's lifeblood. "Do you think they will remember us?" Leif asked softly, voice carrying a mixture of hope and doubt. Wanasha smiled, her dark eyes reflecting the ancient wisdom of the forest. "Our story is written in the stones, the trees, and the river's song. As long as the land breathes, so too will the legacy of the Vinfolk." The legacy of the Vinfolk was more than a simple tale of discovery or conquest. It was a living testament to resilience, adaptation, and unity. The Norse, who had journeyed across treacherous seas, learned to live in harmony with the native peoples, exchanging not only goods, but knowledge, stories, and customs. The old gods of the North were honored with the spirits of the forest. Festivals celebrated both the turning of the seasons and the sacred cycles of the land. Songs blended ancient Norse melodies with native chants, creating a new harmony born from respect and shared experience. Trade routes expanded beyond Hjartahol, reaching native clans deeper into the forest and along the riverways. Iron tools, crafted by Norse smiths, improved the lives of farmers and hunters alike, while native medicines healed wounds and eased ailments unknown to European healers. The exchange of ideas strengthened the bonds of friendship and peace. Yet, despite the harmony, Vinland remained a land of challenges. The wilderness was vast and untamed. Storms ravaged the coasts, threatening to undo the fragile settlements. Wild beasts prowled the forests, and beyond, unknown tribes watched with wary eyes, their intentions as uncertain as the shifting tides. But the people of Hjartahol were no longer strangers to hardship. Each hardship faced had forged their spirit, tempered their resolve. Life's thoughts often returned to the generations yet to come. The children, born under Vinland's sky, who would inherit not just land, but the legacy of courage and unity. He saw in their bright eyes the promise of a future unshackled by the fears of the past. One evening, beneath the vast expanse of stars, Leif gathered with the village elders and leaders beneath the sacred grove. The air was cool and filled with the scent of pine and burning sage. Young warriors and wise elders sat side by side, their faces illuminated by flickering firelight. Discussions turned to the future, plans for expanding settlements, forging stronger alliances, and exploring lands still untouched. The words of hope and determination filled the grove, echoing the spirit of a people united by their shared journey. In his final years, Leif took up the quill to write a letter, a message to those who might come after, a testament to the trials and triumphs of the Vinfolk. He wrote of the endless sea and the dense forests, of the battles fought with sword and spirit, of the friendships forged across cultures. Most of all, he wrote of unity, the fragile but powerful bond that had saved them and would carry their story into the future. When the letter was sealed and entrusted to a ship sailing east, Leif stood once more upon the cliffs, watching as the vessel vanished into the horizon. "The story is ours," he said quietly, "but the future belongs to those brave enough to live it." One usher, standing close, nodded with a smile, touched by the weight of countless seasons. The legacy of the Vinfolk was not carved in stone alone, but breathed in the wind, whispered by the trees, and carried in the hearts of all who called Vinland home. It was a story of discovery, not only of new lands, but of new ways to live, to love, to fight, and to endure. As the fires burned bright that night in Hjartahol, reaching up toward the vast, endless sky, the people gathered in song and celebration, honoring the past, embracing the present, and dreaming of the future. Beneath the stars that had guided the first ships to this wild new world so long ago, the spirit of the Vinfolk lived on, eternal as the sea, steadfast as the mountains, and as enduring as the ancient forests of Vinland itself.